Well, thank you everybody for coming to our Armchair Traveler Series number 4 for this year. And today we are going to take kind of a trip through the past to kind of the very foundings of this area, the first explorations of this area. And, you know, very exciting topic. We've asked Roanoke Festival Park to come out and speak with us about it. It's very exciting. The presenter told me a little bit about it. It's quite awesome to learn about. But before I get started with that, I wanted to thank everybody for coming here today. I also wanted to thank friends for helping support this long-standing program in its 17th year or 17th annual season. It's been a major success every year, and we just love our friends for helping. And if you're already a friend, thank you for supporting us. If you're not a friend, please join the friends. We love to have friends. So come join the friends if you can. If not, that's fine. If supporting them in any way, coming to the library and enjoying the library for its resources is just as good. We love that as well. Everybody coming to the library helps support library learning, education, and fun and culture. So, without further ado, we're going to introduce our speaker, Ms. Leah Polk from Roanoke Festival Park, and she's going to be talking about merchantable commodities and the early explorations of the North Carolina area. So thank you so much. Welcome.
So like Jared mentioned, I'm a historical interpreter at Roanoke Island Festival Park in Manio. So thank you for joining us tonight to discuss Thomas Harriot and John White and some of their connections to the Albemarle region. So my plan for tonight is to start with a little bit of context for the Roanoke voyages, and specifically the 1585 voyage, and then move forward with the discussion of Harriot's A Brief and True Report, White's watercolor paintings, and the ways in which both of these men depicted Roanoke Island in a way that was strategic and that would be for an English audience. So I believe we're going to have some time for questions at the end as well, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have. So our story begins with a couple people that you may recognize, Queen Elizabeth I and Sir Walter Raleigh. So in 1584, Elizabeth granted Raleigh an exclusive patent to establish a colony in the New World. Raleigh never actually traveled to Roanoke Island, so it's important to note that. But he quickly got the team together, and in April of 1584, there were 2 ships heading west to survey the area. So these were carrying Arthur Barlow and Philip Amadas. They landed near where present-day Oregon Inlet is and began exploring the area. And they returned to England with 2 Algonquin men, Manio and Wanges, which if you're familiar with Roanoke Island at all and the towns that are there, it's the name of the 2 largest towns there. They marketed the New World in England after this expedition as a place with lots of potential. So, why establish a spot in the New World to begin with? And why Roanoke Island specifically? So Spain was already in what we would know today as Florida. England and Spain are not on the best of terms at this time. So Amadas and Barlow thought that this island would serve as a good military base, and it could also serve as a permanent colony at some point. But Roanoke Island specifically because of its location. So you've got the mainland of North Carolina, you have Roanoke Island, I should have put this on the slide, you have Roanoke Island and then the Outer Banks, the rest of the Outer Banks there. So the water around Roanoke Island is very shallow. That means that ships can't get in and out of this area very easily. It's a good strategic spot. And they also thought that it would be a good spot for privateering. Privateering is essentially, it's a lot like piracy, legal piracy. You have a letter of marque from the Queen to pay your taxes. Then it's privateering and not piracy. But after the return of the 1584 expedition, there were 2 attempts for an English settlement on Roanoke Island, in 1585 and in 1587. So 1587 is the one that people know most about, they're most familiar with. That's the one that becomes known as the Lost Colony over time. But I'm going to focus a little bit more on the 1585 voyage tonight, because this is where we get a brief and true report, as well as a lot of White's watercolor paintings. So the 1585 voyage begins with 7 ships under the command of Richard Grenville, departing from Plymouth in England on April 9th, 1585. So they arrived in the Outer Banks in June. The ships included, like I said, there were 7 ships, and they included the Red Lion, the Tiger, the Roebuck, the Elizabeth, the Dorothy, and 2 unnamed pinnaces. So the ship that I have here is a picture of the Elizabeth II, which is the recreation of the Elizabeth at the park. This is kind of on the medium to small side. There were certainly ships that were larger than the Elizabeth. There were ships that were smaller, particularly the pinnaces. 600 men arrived, with 300 intended to stay, so it's split about half and half between sailors and soldiers. So 300 are intended to stay, which include, or I'm sorry, sailors and settlers, I should say. Because of those 300, there are some soldiers, and then there are some tradesmen as well. Skilled tradesmen that are there to build a town, get things up and going, build a permanent settlement. However, there are a number of things that make the 1585 voyage unsuccessful overall. They arrive in June, so that's well past the planting season. They're not able to plant things. Also, their flagship ran aground. So the Tiger ran around near where present-day Ocracoke is, which means that they lost a lot of supplies. And because they lost a lot of supplies, they're arriving after the planting season, they're simply not able to support these 300 men that they're intending to stay. So, 108 stay. They're governed by Ralph Lane and include Thomas Harriot and John White. They're also not expecting cold winters. So Roanoke Island is about at the same latitude as northern Africa. So they're expecting something that's significantly more tropical. They're expecting the hot summers, the hot humid summers and the bugs and things like that, but they're not expecting it to get cold. Yes, they're lack familiarity with the local climate. They also ruined their relationship with the local Algonquin tribes. So initially, this was a very friendly relationship. It's important to note, as I'm talking tonight, that Algonquin, when I say Algonquin, that's kind of an umbrella term. So that's a language group. So that includes lots of different tribes that are under it. Specifically for Roanoke Island, a lot of times we're talking about the Roanoke, which is what the tribe that Wanchese belong to, the Croatan tribe, which is the tribe that Manio belonged to, and then the Chilliwack as well, although there were certainly others. However, let me get back on track. The relationship was initially very friendly. They're sharing food. English at this time are not super well versed in things like hunting and fishing. There's a lot of private land in England. And if you're not rich and you're hunting on private land, that's considered poaching. So if you're not rich, you don't have the land, you may not be very well versed in hunting and fishing, things like that. The Algonquin people are also sharing their food. There's a drought this year, which contributes to a lack of food. These tribes, of course, need to feed their own people as well, so they pull back from being able to share with the English some. There's disease that's unknowingly spread by the English, as well as direct English contributions to the demise of this relationship. So burning villages, killing local chiefs. You may have heard about Chief Mangina, who was shot and then beheaded by Ralph Lane and his men. So, after about a year, the colony returns home with Francis Drake in 1586. So Francis Drake has just finished burning St. Augustine. He comes up the coast, and he says, I can leave a ship with you. In case he sees they're having trouble, he says, I can leave a ship with you in case you want to go home. They say, sure. And then a hurricane damages that ship. So they end up going home with Francis Drake in 1586. So let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the individuals that we see, or that were some of the specific individuals that we see depicting Roanoke Island at this time. And we'll start with John White, who is an English artist. We don't know a whole lot about him other than what we know in relation to Roanoke Island, the Lost Colony, the 1585 expedition, those sorts of things. So he accompanies the 1585 colony to document the New World, and then he's the governor of the 1587 colony. And he produced watercolor renderings of local flora and fauna, and he also depicted the native peoples that were living on and near Roanoke Island in 1585. So on the island itself, and then up into the mainland as well. The picture that or the painting, carving that we see here is a pretty famous one. It's of him finding Croatoan written on a palisade wall, which comes into play a bit more with 1587. I'll mention as well that White may have also accompanied the 1584 expedition. Harriet and White are both believed to have accompanied that expedition as well. So White's paintings, as I've mentioned, documented the local flora and fauna and the populations that are there, because he's showing a new place to England, but he's also strategically depicting this new place. White's education shows through the illustrations that he produces at Roanoke. For instance, he had to be familiar with the tradition of miniature portraiture, which is called limning. which is painting small portraits of the wealthy and powerful, and including items that indicate the subject's rank. So I've got some examples that we'll see a little bit later, where I'll point out some of these strategies that White's using in terms of the things that he depicts with the people that he portrays, as well as their posing. Several of the illustrations of Algonquin peoples were posed with the subject hand on their hip and then turned toward a pointed toe, which you see a lot specifically with Habsburg paintings at the time. And in the work of Nicholas Hilliard, who was the Queen's favorite lender. So Hilliard was responsible for many portraits of the courts of both Elizabeth I and James I, so many of these popular and well-known portraits of like Elizabeth I, Walter Raleigh, James, these really powerful figures were done by Hilliard. White and then Harriet, as we'll discuss shortly, also strategically depicted the flora and fauna of the area. So he's intending to show these images to an English audience. So he wants to, A, depict the area in a way that the English people will understand. So what I mean by that is that when he depicts people in power, he's depicting them with these poses that they will understand as them being powerful. Then he also wants to entice them. So he's painting with investors in mind. Many of White's watercolors were destroyed on the return home with Drake, so unfortunately we don't have a lot of them. The ones that do survive belong to the British Museum. I believe a few years ago some of them were in Raleigh for a short time, at Jamestown, and there was a third place that I can't remember off the top of my head. But as I've mentioned, White's style borrows from European portraiture conventions of the time. So for instance, by depicting powerful native people in a way that Europeans signal power in portraiture, so I talked a bit about this a second ago, White's able to convey their power even if they look different than the English would understand as someone in power. So for instance, one chief carries a gigantic bow that, while perhaps not exact to the time, an English audience would understand that as a soldier, drawing on ideas of like the English longbow and looking similar to that. The jewelry that some of the people in his paintings wear symbolizes wealth and status. Additionally, he'll depict the daily life of Algonquin tribes in the area. So again, when we look at these examples, we'll see examples of daily life, ceremony, villages. This was something brand new to the English. So it's their first look at a brand new place of the New World and the people that live there. There's a scene of local Algonquins fishing, and it shows an enticing array of catches. So this includes catfish, crabs, sturgeon. Other paintings show cooking methods and corn cultivation. Deborah Harkness, who's a historian at the University of Southern California, has said that White's messaging is essentially, quote, come to this place where everything is neat and tidy and there's food everywhere. So they want to make it seem enticing. There's also notably no sign of the English in these paintings. They're notably absent. So we know that they are there because White's painting these scenes, but he doesn't depict them in his paintings. He's painting with investors in mind. One last note before we take a look at some examples. It's important to note that White is using watercolor. So at this time, watercolor is seen as a more genteel medium than something like oil paint. White sketched in graphite pencil and then colored with dyes like indigo, vermilion, ground gold and silver leaf, other pigments. And then, as we mentioned, many of these were unfortunately destroyed. But we do see engravings from White's paintings made most notably by Theodore DeBry in a brief and true report of the Newfoundland of Virginia, which is kind of where we connect with Harriet here. But let's take a look at some examples. So these are some examples of course, we have a catfish up here, a butterfly, a pelican, an alligator. He's making these watercolor paintings on the voyage, so there was about a 2-week stop in Puerto Rico as well, so he'll do some of these paintings there, and then some after he arrives in Roanoke Island as well. Okay, now we're going to get to some of the styles that he uses in portraiture. So we see this really large bow here, and we see the hand on the hip, we see the pointed toe, the person that is turned towards his pointed toe. We see that again here and there. So he's depicting power. We can see the jewelry, so like the necklaces, to show wealth, other things that the English are going to understand as wealthy and powerful. Now I will note as well that White is not super well known for his artistic skills outside of this. He's In some cases, he's not a super skilled artist. He paints women with 2 feet. Sometimes there's some proportions that are off from time to time, but he is well known, of course, for these paintings. So we'll see some examples. This is what I was talking about earlier of people fishing, and you see a variety of catches here. Now, I am admittedly not super well versed in identifying fish, so I won't try and do that here, but we see that he has there are different types of fish depicted. We see cooking, specifically the fish here. We have some accompanying text that says it's eating pots, their meat of earth, and boiling of their fish over the flame fire. And then we'll also see he'll depict some cultural experiences that he has, such as a dance circle, as well as burying the dead. And of course, again, some accompanying text up here, which unfortunately I cannot. It's also important to think about the maps that White and Harriet produce. So we'll get to some examples of maps themselves in just a moment. But White's maps are noted for their accuracy, and they become standard representations of the New World for a long while. And we'll take a look at those. What we do see here some depictions of the villages themselves, kind of from a bird's eye view. Okay, so here's what I'm talking about with maps. So this is a map of eastern North America. It goes from Florida all the way up to the Chesapeake Bay. So we see Florida down here. Roanoke Island is going to be right about there, and then it goes up into the Chesapeake. So this is the same painting, just zoomed in a bit. So you'll see Roanoke Island right about there. Like I said, these are noted for their accuracy. As you can see, they look fairly similar to maps that we see today. Maybe not with as many inlets. Those, of course, coming up, but fairly accurate. So then we'll move on to Thomas Harriot and talk a little bit about him. As I mentioned earlier, he's also maybe on the 1584 voyage. He's an English mathematician, astronomer, linguist, scientist. He has a large skill set. He learned the Algonquin language from Manio and Wanchese. They exchanged, Manio and Wanchese learned some English, he learned the Algonquin language. Harriet accompanied the 1585 colony and assisted with exploration and map making, which, as we've talked about, is notable for accuracy. He also wrote a brief and true report of the Newfoundland of Virginia. Maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, but when I say Virginia, I don't just mean the state that we think of today. The land that's claimed as Virginia is much of the East Coast that we know today. So Elizabeth, early on, even before these expeditions, gave permission to claim any land that wasn't claimed by another Christian kingdom, essentially. They think that that's okay. The English think that that's okay because Native Americans aren't Christians and the Spanish are Catholic. We're in the middle of the Reformation, so that opens a whole new can of worms in terms of what the English are going to consider another Christian kingdom. So all of that to say, Virginia extends much farther than we think of it being today. It's named for Elizabeth the Virgin. All right, so Harriet's strategy. The long title is Brief and True Report of the Newfoundland of Virginia, and there's even more beyond that. I'm going to refer to it as a Brief and True Report, or just Brief and True Report here, but it's meant to entice an English population. It's written with economic opportunity in mind, and with the idea that the English would eventually have a permanent settlement on Roanoke Island. It's written to evaluate the economic potential of Virginia, and with this appeal in mind. So again, just as White is painting with investors in mind, Harriet is writing with investors in mind. He wants to show the English that this is something worth investing in, this is somewhere that's worth moving to. So he's going to largely focus on Native people, their food sources, agriculture, living arrangement, political organization, religion. He'll also include the merchantable commodities. That's the first section of the document, and where I got my title for my presentation tonight. And that'll include things like plants, animals, economic opportunities that can be found there. It's published with support from Walter Raleigh in 1588, with the hopes that the English want to invest in and settle Virginia. And then in 1590, we see a publication that includes DeVry's engravings. So we're going to take a look at some excerpts from a Brief and True report. I've highlighted, or I've bolded rather, some of the passages that I think best encapsulate how he's trying to write this strategically, how he's trying to get people in on moving to Roanoke Island, in on investing in Roanoke Island. Of course, these are just a few examples, but we have things like sassafras and cedar and wine. And Harriet says that sassafras is has a most pleasant and sweet smell, and of rare virtues and medicine for the cure of many diseases. He says that they can make things with cedar that can be shipped with freight and other principal commodities that would yield profit. So that's something that he's very concerned with throughout. Wine, there are several types of grapes that he finds that are native to Roanoke Island. And he says when they're planted and husbanded as they should be, an important commodity in wines can be established from the New World. There's an herb called upawak, which we know today is tobacco. It says the fumes purge superfluous phlegm and grows humor from the body. And then at the end he says, we've found many rare and wonderful proofs of the upawak's virtues, which would themselves require a volume to relate. So he's writing this again in a way that makes this seem really, really enticing to English investors and to English people who might be able to move there. We have fir trees, suitable for making ships' masts. Of course, at this time, we have a lot of ships. They're made of wood. We don't have ironclads as of yet. So fir trees are going to be very important, or trees are going to be very important, but specifically fir trees. They grow very tall, they grow fairly straight. Wood in general, we talk about cypress. The wood has great value, many excellent uses, and it's held in high estimation. Then he also talks about the climate itself. So, as I mentioned, the English were not expecting the cold. So he talks about how the air is so much warmer in all seasons than it is in England. He says that it's temperate, it's never so violently hot as it is near the tropics, even though, as I'll remind you, they were expecting something tropical. And he specifically talks about the wholesomeness of the climate. And he compares it to the mainland as well. So not only is he talking about Roanoke Island, he's thinking about opportunities for moving inland as well. So sometimes we made journeys farther into the mainland, and there we found the soil richer, the trees taller, the ground firmer, and the topsoil deeper. We saw there more and larger fields and finer grass as good as any in England. In some places, the ground was high, rocky, and hilly, fruits grew plentifully, beasts lived in greater abundance. You've got to think about it, this time England is experiencing a lot of deforestation. Not lots of opportunity, it's fairly crowded in a lot of places. Being able to own land is something that's very enticing at the time, so this new world opens up a big opportunity for that. If you are so brave enough, according to the English, if you're so brave enough to do it. He says, why then may we not expect even more and greater plenty from the inland parts? He says, many other goods which I leave to your discreet and gentle consideration may be raised there, and there are also many already growing which we have not yet discovered. So there were some trips that were made inland on this 1585 expedition as well. I didn't touch on that very much. There are some that are made inland, which contributes to the map making that White and Harriet do. But he's thinking if Roanoke Island is so good, then even further inland looks better. So how then are White and Harriet some of the first influencers in travel and all? John White and Thomas Harriet provided England's first looks at the New World. It's this new and exciting place that they want people to invest in. They want people to move there. Harriet describes a world with lots of economic potential, and White's watercolors of plants, animals, insects, and people that the English had never encountered really lodged themselves into the English imagination, into the Elizabethan English imagination at least. These paintings and maps also became standard for representation, paintings and maps became standard for representations of the area, notably with the representations of the Native Americans in the area. So generations of British historians used White's illustrations to describe Native Americans, even those that were from other regions. In fact, there will be portraits of Plains tribes that come about in the 19th century, and that's going to be the next big group of portrayals of Native peoples. So I want to thank you for joining me tonight. If you have any questions, I am happy to answer. no, that was hit a lot of different points there. So.
What's it?
You said they said parts were rocky and hilly. How far inland did they go?
So they're going to go a little bit, I don't know exactly how far in they went, but they're going to go a little bit farther up. Let me go back to the map.
Charlottesville.
Yeah. They're going to go a little bit farther up this way as well. So not so far as into the mountains. Far enough inland that it's going to be just like a few days. There's some settlements that are right around here as well. So I know that doesn't quite answer your question.
They went in North Carolina, up the Chowan River to Wenton, North Carolina. That's as far as they went on the Chowan. And then they went up the Roanoke River, but I'm not sure how far. They were looking for the Chesapeake Bay.
So I mean, separate from this, the 1587 colonies actually intended to land, or intended to land and to settle in the Chesapeake Bay. They get dropped off.
They even Thomas Harry and John White, because the map that was drawn ended right at where the Chowan River branches to the left. That's where the map actually ends.
I remember that.
And how many paintings were estimated to be done? And you said some were lost. I was just wondering if they reported how many had been lost.
We don't know. It's not in the records as far as I'm aware. We just know that a lot of them were. Unfortunately, in records, a lot of times you'll see things like, specifically in our case, when we're talking about like coal and iron being brought over, they'll say a year's supply of this or a year's supply of that. You think, oh, everyone knows what that means. Everyone knows what a year's supply of coal is. Everyone knows how many paintings John White did. So unfortunately, it's...
You mentioned on the first voyage they came in through the Ocracoke inlet area, and
Yes.
I understood that until 1800, when two different hurricanes kind of closed it, there was an inlet kind of where Nag's Head is now. Was that used in some of the settlement on Roanoke Island?
Not in this one. In this one, they're going to come around, go up.
The Oregon Inlet?
So Oregon Inlet will come about in the 19th century. So that one, they'll land close to where that is today, but the actual inlet itself doesn't come about until the 19th century.
Until it's opened up.
Right. So inlets become a very tricky thing nowadays, unfortunately. But in this case, they're going to go, for the 1585 voyage at least, they will go, or at least that's the most popular idea. 1584, as you said, did land closer to where Oregon was. I imagine some small boats, because that water is going to be really shallow right around Roanoke Island here. So ships won't make it in there, but small boats will. Yes.
This is me and my forgetfulness, but was Harriet in the first and the second, and on either one of those two, did they come close to Edenton? Because what they were talking about by the end of this was they were to go 50, is it 50 or 80 miles into the
50.
50 miles into the
Yeah, so he's believed to be on the 1584 expedition, and he's definitely on the 1585.
But nothing in England or any place shows that they had any going up of the various rivers around here, and no mention, because there was a Indian tribe here in Edenton.
Right.
They did go. It's well documented. I've read about 22 books on the subject and wrote a book myself. And they absolutely did sail to Admiral Sound all the way to Wenton, North Carolina, and up the Roanoke River. It was very rapid, and they stayed there 4 days and had to eat a dog to survive.
Yeah, by the end of it, they're starving, right? Starving, eating the dogs. But they are meat dogs, but still, still not a pleasant thought. Yes.
How did they depict the Indians or indigenous people back in the English as far as potential danger or good guys?
I think it really depends. So after the 1584 expedition, you have Manio and Wanchese that go back to England. They're kind of the representatives, so to speak, for the people that live there. And in that case, they were greeted, the relationship was very good. It seemed like something that would be very promising. Now, by the time you get to the end of the 1585 expedition, and you've caused a lot of problems yourself, there's been a lot of tension. I can imagine that for the English, they're not going to want to, it's not going to be depicted as well, which, then again, the 1587 voyage is going up towards the Chesapeake and gets dropped off on Roanoke Island, in part because of the problems that had existed with the native people. The problems that they caused with the native people there. I mean, hear me clearly when I say the problems that, in many cases, they caused for themselves.
Was White and Harriet sent by the Queen to try to bring people home?
I don't know if it was specifically by the Queen, but their job was to document the area and to make it seem enticing and to make it seem like something that investors are going to want to put their money into. Yes.
Was this like, in terms of them trying to market all the resources and stuff, was this something that would be common with other settlements that would come a little bit later on or a little bit before? That like kind of a work of literature of saying, come here and make your fortune sort of thing?
That's a good question, and I would imagine so. Off the top of my head, I'm blanking in terms of other specific sources, but yes, I can imagine that that would be something that's established. Yes.
I'm sorry. I've got my poor vision on the map to the left, above the ship on the far right. What is that above the ship?
Right
What
here.
is the top ship?
It's like a sea monster.
You're the left.
Yeah.
What is that supposed to represent?
It looks like
So it looks like is it a whale?
Oh, maybe it's a
It looks
whale.
like some.
I thought it was a sea monster.
Could be a sea monster. We're still in that. We're still in a period where those appear, those sorts of things appear in maps.
But the tail is.
Yeah. My guess would be something that they saw that exists that looked. They didn't know what it was. Maybe. Yes, something large. Yes.
So my question is near to about the paintings. White was known for his animals and ships that he would put in paintings, but I never noticed before the shields. Do you know what the different shields represented?
Yeah. I wonder if they have to do with the other places that were explored. The other places that this is my own. I'm not. This is my own kind of just thinking through it. Other places that they may have had a fort, or other places that there's an idea. There's a theory for the colony that becomes known as the Lost Colony. That some of them may have moved a little bit further inland to a fort that was right around here. And I wonder if those.
I didn't know if it was the shield for White and Harriet, or
That's also a good possibility.
as a possibility.
There are lots of good things to dig into now. You brought up lots of good things.
Well, thank you so much. Fascinating. Thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me.
We'd love to have you here. Love to have you. Thank you. Well, this concludes number 4 of our Armchair Traveler series, but as you know, next week we have another guest coming by to speak about, guests will be coming by. We're going to have the Edenton Tea Party here. So we'll have each of the ladies that you can come to talk to and ask them all about their experience.
All 52 of them?
Not all 52, we can only get 9. And they'll be coming by in costume to come talk about their experience and talk about the Edenton Tea Party and help share and do some living history.
And it's humorous.
And it's humorous too, it's gonna be fun.
Is Penelope coming?
I think Penelope is one of the characters, I think so. So, but yeah, so stay tuned, that's next week. And remember, as Miss Lucy was saying, our finale will be, we'll be skipping the holiday week, and then we'll be coming back on the 21st, and we will be having Julian Eicher. He will be talking about Lafayette and his visit to North Carolina and America, and his influence and his history through his life. So again, thank you all for coming, and have a good evening. Thank you.